So my name is Paddy Tyson. I am an author of next to no repute, but I am editor of Overland magazine, and I'm editor of countless travel books. So one of the things that people ask me all the time, and indeed Matt and Reese just did recently, was what makes a good travel book? Now it's an incredibly difficult question to answer. So I thought that we would put together a panel and spread it around and ask all these guys instead. And who I'm joined with today on my illustrious panel, Gordon May, who has produced countless books as a vehicle historian for Royal Enfield, but also 4 travel books in his own right. No, sorry, is it one to come, Gordon? Have I been
one on its way?
What is that one? What's on its way?
Okay, so last year I rode from Nordkap to Cape Town on a 1952 Royal Enfield, so that one's slowly coming together.
Right, and will that be Overland to Nordkap? Given that your other books are called Overland to India, Overland to Egypt, Overland to Vietnam?
Overland to South Africa, I think, is it's the working title at the moment. Okay,
cool. We've also got Helen Lloyd, who you did meet last night if you were watching. Helen has travelled by horseback, by anything that floats, by foot. But if you either ride a bicycle or a motorbike, you probably know her from the books she's written about those. So Desert Snow, was that your first, Helen?
Yeah.
And that was cycling up Africa.
Yep, down.
Followed by, if I remember, a Siberian Winter's Tale, which was just bonkers cycle across Siberia in the winter. and then her more recent book, Iceland Cerro Saga, which was launched at the Overland event Winter Warmer last February. Now, the only reason I wanted to really say that was sadly the Overland event Winter Warmer that's scheduled for February coming has had to be cancelled. Or postponed even. It's a victim of COVID. Now, the main loser there, of course, is Coco, the same charity that the Armchair Adventure Festival is raising money for. Now, I'm delighted to say that ticket holders to the Winter Warmer have already given another 150 quid, and another 150 quid has come from sales to the Overland Armchair, which was videos of some of the main Overland event last summer. So thank you so much for that. But sorry, back to Helen. She really, her travel credentials need no bolstering, but bizarrely, she's done that anyway. Today, where are you joining us from, Helen?
Well, it's Scotland. Yeah, I'm in my van.
You're in a van?
Everything's an adventure, isn't it?
Everything's an adventure. So you're living in the van at the minute?
Yeah.
Yes, and wonderful technology.
It always sounds more glamorous than it really is. I'm basically parked up in a lay-by. but I do have a nice view.
Yeah, and what's the weather like up there?
Sunny.
Good, nicer than Oxfordshire. So, and our third panelist, Sam Manicom. Sam has been traveling definitely by any means possible from childhood, and he often classes himself, or is called by others, as almost an accidental author, because his epic global 8-year motorbike journey produced 4 books. And if I get them in order, Into Africa, Under Asian Skies, Distant Suns, and Tortillas to Totems. Is that right, Sam?
That's it, exactly.
Yes. And what are you doing with yourself at the moment? Because you are under particular lockdown.
Oh, yeah. I mean, due to health things, I've just had to be a little bit more careful than many people since March. But time has been very busy. I've spent quite a lot of time helping new authors and writing magazine articles and, yeah, just generally filling time. I don't know where all of the time has gone to, but every day I just get to the end of it and just think, wow, what happened? I know.
And you, of course, all of this year, you would have been crisscrossing the States, promoting, because you've become well known as you're a storyteller par excellence. Yeah.
I really enjoy doing presentations and bouncing around the States and the UK, and I've been lucky enough to be over in mainland Europe a few times. It's just excellent fun, sharing the fun and encouraging people. One of my favourite sayings is, if an idiot like Sam can do this, then perhaps I could too. And just being able to bring that across, and the magic there is out there in this world of ours, it's a complete buzz. It's a good way to live.
Super. Now we could, as we've we all know each other. We could well talk about books randomly for hours and hours and hours, but we don't have that time. So we've got a parameter put upon us, which was to choose 3 books that have really impacted on you, touched you somehow. And we talk around those and see what it is that makes good travel writing, or what it was that really made that impact on you. So just to list them, we'll just start. So Sam, I'll go back to you. So what were your 3? We'll just list them.
Okay, the first one was The Old Patagonian Express by Paul Thoreau. Now, all of the books that I've chosen are actually quite old. There are so many really good new books out. I thought I'd have a bit of a delve into the past, and looking at my bookshelf, this is where these came from. The next one is my favourite motorcycle travel book, and that's One Man Caravan by Robert Edison Fulton Jr. And my third book is Running with the Moon by Johnny Bealby.
Right. And Gordon, what are your 3?
Okay, so I've gone first of all with Just a Little Run Around the World by Rosie Swale Pope. Then Cape Cold to Cape Hot, and a really oldie, but a goodie by Richard Pape. And the third book I was going to talk about, actually, India, the Shimmering Dream, I've loaned to someone else and it hasn't come back. So instead, I have to talk about a motorcycle journey. So I've gone with A Ride in the Sun by... You've got a copy.
I've got a copy. I'll dig it out. But never mind.
So I've gone with Peggy Thomas's A Ride in the Sun as a substitute for that.
Right. And Helen?
I've chosen Tracks by Robin Davidson.
I haven't got here to hold up.
No, and I haven't. They're all on my Kindle or on my phone. South by Ernest Shackleton, and Consolations in the Forest by Sylvain Tesson.
Right. And just to fill you in then, so I've chosen Johnny Bealby's Running with the Moon. And I know that it was all on your shortlist either way, but we sort of thought, oh, everybody can't quite choose the same thing. Dan Walsh's These Are the Days That Must Happen to You, which many say is a real Marmite book. And finally, Tim Cahill, who doesn't use a motorbike, Road Fever. So let me see who's going to justify themselves first. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. We'll do it alphabetically. Gordon. So talk us through some of your books and we'll see whether or not we agree with you, because I think we've probably all read most of the books we're all discussing today.
Okay, so I'll start with Pape's Cape Cold to Cape Hot, which was his 1955 journey from Nordkap to Cape Town in a Austin A90. And he set out to be the first person to actually make this journey. It became a bit of a race because a French car manufacturer was competing with him. It was very difficult to get to the start of the journey. There was no tunnel to Nordkap, so he had to have the car taken on a boat and then taken to the North Cape by a tractor, so he was towed on rollers. It's a real boy's own adventure. It has great pace, which is one of the things I always look for, really enjoy in a travel book. He leaves a trail of destruction behind him. It's very much of its time. He crashes and destroys the first car. He falls out. He's a very pugnacious character. He falls out with his first co-driver, who then becomes a competitor to be the first to complete this journey. His second co-driver, Pape, actually drives him to the point of collapse and he has to retire ill. So he then persuades a RAF sergeant to desert and become a co-driver. But he gets arrested and the adventure just continues and continues. But he actually does make it down to Cape Town as the first person to complete this journey. And I just love it. There's a lot not to love about it, but I just love it's a boy's own adventure, and it takes you, the author takes you with him on that journey.
There is a lot to not like about it, I have to say. And it almost immediately brings us into that two questions. One is it the rip-roaring adventure that makes the good book, or is it the travel writing? And I'm hoping that we'll address that in more depth. But the other thing it brings us into is travel books of their time. And you know, you still enjoy that book. I enjoyed that book. Either of you guys comfortable with it? And yet,
Comfortable.
we probably find it a little distasteful that it's handy to carry grenades in case the locals annoy you, or to just march into a room, pretend you're a, I don't know, a white local leader and tell everyone they'll be arrested unless they do exactly what you say. I mean, he's let alone the misogyny. It's it is, and yet I too really liked that book. So is it so? Do you find, Gordon, that it's the rip-roaring adventure for you that runs through your theme there?
It certainly is with this particular book. He's a very hard person to like, but yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, there are other elements I look for. Obviously, I ride vintage classic motorcycles. I'm always at the side of the road fixing them, and I like nuts and bolts in a journey where the people are having to actually overcome problems, and certainly in with the vehicles, the mechanical problems, and Pape certainly has to do that. So that's another element that I look for. But for sure, it's the pace of this book that makes you keep reading to the end. You think, how can this man keep going? Can he really succeed? And of course he does. He's so single-minded.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the book too. It was a friend of mine, Dave Pape, who I don't know whether he's a descendant of this chap or not, but anyway, he put me in touch with the book. And I thoroughly enjoyed the ride through history. And yet, okay, there are moments where you just think, good grief, did people really talk to other people like that? Did they really behave like that to other people? But if you can accept that as being part of history, part of reality of what's gone before, and something that we've all learned that we shouldn't be doing now, keep those things into perspective. It's quite a read. The courage and the determination and the drive, sorry, no pun intended on four wheels, but it works. So I had to slip it in. It's a book of its time, and it's fascinating. And he really does bring Africa in particular alive according to those times.
Yeah, I mean, there are many more and more books either coming back into circulation, thankfully, or, I mean, this is one that I'm really hoping, I don't know if you can see that, Full Circle by Richard and Mopsa English. Now, they went around the world in the 80s only. This book only ever had that first print, which is such a shame. And even in the 80s, there was something about the time where Richard still carried a suit. It was the sort of thing where they couldn't get into a port in Japan, and he just went and demanded. He said, "Look here, chap, this is a British passport, and we should be able to do this." And they sort of went, "Oh, okay." And I mean, you just can't do that anymore, which is just wonderful. But your replacement book then, Gordon.
Ride in the Sun by Peggy Iris Thomas. So Peggy Iris Thomas was she came from a very well-to-do family in England, but her family fell on hard times in the Great Depression. She went through the Second World War in the Women's Royal Navy and met a lot of GIs and Canucks who told wonderful tales of their countries, and she decided that after the war she would go and explore those places. And she did it on a little BSA Bantam, not your obvious choice for an overlanding motorcycle. And on the back of the bike, she carried her dog, Matalo, who was a whopping big Airedale Terrier. And she spent 14 months riding coast to coast across Canada, down the west coast of the United States, through Mexico, then having caught a steamer across the Gulf of Mexico from Florida up to New York. And it's a wonderfully charming story with a lot of naivety, with just a delightful view of the world, and the dog just adds such a wonderful element to her adventure. She wild camped in a lot of places, got herself into a few tight corners, but just always managed to work her way through them. And it's a story that's very close to my heart. Yeah.
I love it. It has an understatedness to it. I love the fact that she just casually mentions, no, she'll take off her shoes. She's got a lovely pair of shoes. She'd rather ride barefoot when it rained than get the shoes wet, and all these sorts of things. Or what was it? Didn't she lose they lost the typewriter into the Gulf of Mexico or something, and had to dive for it and dry it out to keep making her notes. And yet none of it told in an overly dramatic way, is it?
No, not at all. It's one of the things I enjoyed about it too. And there's the day that she's riding in her frock. And you just think, oh, that really takes you to the time, doesn't it? One of the things that I really enjoyed about this book, and by the way, it went straight into my top 10 favourite motorcycle travel books, was the fact that it shows what travelling was like then. And it's a wonderful comparison with how travelling by motorcycle is now. And so many things haven't changed a jot. The landscape, the people, the opportunities, all of those sorts of things haven't changed. What has changed, of course, is she's picking up jobs along the way, working in a plywood factory. And I love the description of how she got that job and so on. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's beautifully written. It's a really amiable stroll across North America, isn't it?
Yeah, and again, this is something that I know that that Helen wants to discuss. But I too think it's so beautifully told without any ego at all. And whether or not that is because she is a woman is one of these massive questions that maybe we'll get onto a little bit later, but I too really love it. Now, Gordon, your third doesn't involve wheels.
Well, actually, it does involve wheels,
Well,
but it's more legs running. It's Rosie Swale Pope's 5-year run around the world. So 20,000 miles she ran around the world. But she had a variety of carts with her, which started off as shopping trolleys, more or less. And as she progressed, especially crossing Siberia in winter, they became much more sophisticated with a tent basically on the back of them, ready made up so she could climb inside. She's obviously carrying a great deal of grief with her. The reason she set off was her husband had died of cancer. And she wanted to raise awareness for the early diagnosis of prostate cancer as she went, and she certainly does that. Her adventures, particularly in the depths of winter, are really awe-inspiring. Sleeping out at -50 every night and then attempting to run every day. She meets the strangest collection of characters, but some wonderfully good-hearted people. Who help her on her way. And it's a story of real guts and determination and just great spirit. Yeah.
Helen, you have obviously first-hand experience of much of her route and that idea of are you familiar with the book?
Yeah, I've read the book a long time ago now. Yeah, again, there's this real sort of understated bravery in everything she does. I mean, I remember she's in a tent in Siberia in the winter. Actually, I spent an evening with the truck driver when I was in Siberia, and he remembered her. He was like, "Oh, I remember the last girl that came through here. She was like pulling her stuff like in a trailer, and yeah, running around the world." So yeah, like these names keep popping up. But she was in her tent, and some wolves sort of come to investigate, and she's obviously a little bit frightened, but doesn't really make very big deal about it. And that's very sort of that's kind of theme of like, yeah, not really realizing how brave and courageous that she is runs through the whole book, I think.
It's yeah, it's and that's only a 2009 book. It's not as though that's we're delving into the past with this one. 2000, well, maybe we are for some people. The years slip by too quickly, but for me, 2009 is just yesterday. So that really is quite a recent book.
Paddy, I read this book fairly recently, and one of the reasons that I read it was because I had a look at the reviews from people online, and the one that caught me was this one. What makes me want to buy the book at the moment? Rosie's unfailing belief in humanity, her open heart, and her utter lack of cynicism. And I thought, what a wonderful comment.
Yeah, that's
to describe
really
a person.
Yeah, that's really good. I just before, because we'll move Helen in a moment and expand on your books in a second, because I'm watching the time. But that understated dealing with things and really the reader realizing it's more of an adventure than the author themselves when they're doing it, I think for me is so beautifully summed up in a book that I haven't mentioned at all and that wasn't on my list but probably should have been, which was Across America by C.K. Shepard. That's published in the 20s. Was it, Sam? Do you know?
Something like that.
And I think he was using a Henderson something to cross the States before there were any roads. It was 1919, in fact, I think it was first. And just after the war, just after the First War, he crossed. And just a statement of fact that when the engine failed, he managed to find a piece of wood that he could whittle down to create a piston with to put back in. So by every 5th day, he just had to build a new piston. Thought nothing of it, just crack on, you know. I just love that. I was saying, love that. But anyway, sorry, Helen. So let's lead into your books. Which one you want to talk about first?
I'll start with Tracks by Robin Davidson. I'd actually seen, because it's been made into a film. So the trip was she basically trekked across the Gibson Desert in Australia during the 1970s with 4 camels and her dog. And I'd actually watched the film that's been made about it recently first, and I've watched the film over and over and over again and totally loved it. And it's only more recently, or since I've watched the film, that I've actually read the book, and which I've actually enjoyed even more, as is often the case with books and films. And I guess the reason I like it is, well, there's kind of like, in my view, there's kind of 2 kinds of, there's travel books and there's adventure travel books. And I think travel books tend to kind of focus on the place and the peoples and the cultures and the history of wherever that person is. There's lots of excellent authors, I don't know, like Bill Bryson, Tim Butcher, Kapuscinski. But then adventure travel is often a lot more about the person who's doing the trip. It's a lot more about the personal development and how they change on the journey. Yeah. And obviously it's got to involve the places that they go to you know, bring the story to life. Otherwise it's just boring hearing about one person all the time. And I think, so actually the 3 books I've chosen are all adventure travel, I would say. And the one kind of book that really I love is one that I get so absorbed in, I kind of forget that I'm even reading. And then I love it so much and I'm so inspired, I want to go and do that trip, like however ridiculous it is. Like I read Tracks and I want to go to the Australian desert and trek across it with 4 camels. Another book I read was by Sarah Uten, A Dip in the Ocean. And I finished that book and I started researching how I could buy a rowing boat to row across the Pacific. And okay, I haven't done these trips, but the book inspired me to want to go and do it and actually go quite a long way down the planning phase.
So either you're easily led, or
well, yes.
or these books really do make such an impact that they want you to get up and just do that thing. Yeah,
and I think partly it's the way the places that they travel through are described and brought to life, or the people, but also I think what you gain from the trip and what you learn as a person. And certainly with Robin Davidson, she was her trip, the book doesn't actually, the trekking across the desert doesn't begin until about halfway through the book. The first half of the book is the build up to it, because it took her that long to actually get the camels and train them and the finances for the expedition, which is obviously a major part of any journey, and it's often overlooked, I think, in a lot of books. The sort of before you step out the front door, all the stuff that goes on beforehand. But she has a very good understanding of the Aboriginal people, and seems to really, as a process of the trip, she really kind of understands where they come from and their connection with nature, which you can't have just by reading it from afar. You've got to really get involved and experience it.
And yet, I don't know what the other guys think, some travel books that feel they have to make everything totally linear and have to start with the preparation before they go can be incredibly flat. That doesn't necessarily make for a good book. It still has to be executed certain ways. You think, Sam?
Oh, absolutely. None of my books start with the linear process. And that's actually down to some advice from Chris Scott. When I was first writing Into Africa, I sent it to Chris.
Chris Scott of the Adventure Motorcycle Handbook.
That's right. And Chris said to me, Sam, nobody has a clue who you are. They've never heard of you. You've got nothing to kick off with. So start your book with the most life-changing moment from your journey through Africa. Draw people in straight away with that if you possibly can. And it was just, it was controversial, and it seemed to work. And so all of my books start now with one of those special moments. And I really like books that do that. But having said that, there are plenty of books that just don't, and they do follow the linear process, and it is following the journey. It works.
Well, it does, if it's executed as it clearly has been for Helen in the one she's reading there. You know, the build-up does matter. But sorry, Helen, I didn't want to get you off your thread. I just wanted to, because it is an important thing. And I sometimes, as editor of a magazine, sometimes when people send me an article, they feel they have to put everything about their trip in context in that article. And they don't, because what we sometimes forget is that it's about entertainment for the reader. It's, you know.
Yeah, very much. And I've found because I tried to, the first book I wrote, it's not completely linear, because, you know, on a long journey, you might have, I don't know, a strange wildlife encounter early on, and you might have one later on as well. But to write it all in chronological order, kind of having two very similar experiences, and one builds upon the other. But if you separate them with like 10 chapters, it kind of loses the impact. So it's much better, I think, to have all those stories in one place. But intertwining a consistent thread of the journey when it's not chronological is actually very hard to do. And so books that do that, I think, are excellent, and you're not even aware of it at the time when you're reading. It's only when you come back and analyse it that it becomes noticeable, I think.
Now, can I therefore bring you straight on to your choice that is probably written like no other book we're discussing today, because it is a diary, and that's South by Ernest Shackleton.
Oh yeah, well, I've actually gone back and read bits of it, and it's not as journal-like as I remembered. I read it 20 years ago, so my memory when we were talking about it the other day is obviously not so great, but it's very journal-like, in that the trip itself, or the experience, lasted 2 years. So South is about Shackleton's expedition, or failed expedition, to go and be the first person to cross the Antarctic from sea to sea via the South Pole. Unfortunately, on the way there, Endurance, their ship, got trapped in pack ice, and so the book is about the 2 years it took to get help and rescued. So the ship broke up, and so then they had to spend a period of time on the ice itself. And then when that wasn't strong enough to hold them anymore, they took 3 boats from the ship that they'd salvaged and rowed across to Elephant Island, where most of the party were left, and 5 guys plus Shackleton then rowed to South Georgia. Now, each of these little individual bits is an epic experience in itself. And then Shackleton and 2 guys rowed from Elephant Island to South Georgia, survived these horrendous seas, and then 2 of them trekked across the island to get to a whaling station, where they managed to summon help and rescue the entire party. And I think, although the expedition itself was a failure, the trip was a success because everybody survived. To live in those conditions for 2 years is on almost nothing is just remarkable. I think that kind of shows Shackleton's leadership skills as much as anything, that he was always conscious of that. He always put himself second to everybody else. It was important that everybody else was okay before he was. But yes, his book is written, it's very typical of the time, I think, of these early exploration trips. There's a big focus on the weather, the state of the sea, the state of the ice, and descriptions of it. It's very factual in that way. And also from a leadership point of view, he makes quite interesting observations of people within his crew, and sort of how people are in adversity and danger, and how they sacrifice themselves and put others first, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that which is so matter of fact, and as you say, he was in a position of needing to look after everyone else, is quite different then from Constellations of the Forest. Are we going with that one in the end?
Yep.
So a very quick brief, because that's so different, and that is about personal development, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the three books I've chosen, the first two are about essentially traveling on foot or boat, which are both very slow. Well, Constellations of the Forest is actually, he doesn't really go anywhere. But I think the thing with travel and adventure travel is that you develop as a person as you're traveling through a place and going from A to B, step by step or whatever, mile by mile. But also you can be in one place and the place can change with the seasons, and a place in the summer is very different to in the winter, and also a place is very different depending on the state of your mind and how you're feeling at the time. And so the fact that he doesn't actually go anywhere, he spends 6 months in a log cabin in Siberia on the shores of Lake Baikal, but in those 6 months an awful lot changes. The whole landscape changes, the wildlife changes, his state of mind changes. It fluctuates, regularly. Some days he's loving it and very excited about it, and some days he's very introspective, and other days he really struggles, even though he's looking out on the same view every day. And I think, so even though he's not really going many places, yes, he makes trips around the lake and so on, and he does meet people. What he learns from it, and is very similar to what a lot of people learn when they go on a big adventure. The sort of the personal journey of it is this. We
all change, don't we? I mean, it's quite remarkable. You come back from any journey, or when you've been away for that long, you realize what you can achieve and what you do achieve. You always come back a different person. Yeah. Let alone necessarily living through a dramatic experience while you're on the road that will change you even more. So, Sam, conscious of time, but I'm going to move away from you, Helen, for a minute.
Cheers.
Because it seems that so far we have the adventure, and the adventure almost seems to be winning out over anyway it's written, because we've got a sort of a matter of factness and we've got understatedness. So still the adventure is sort of the thing. So Sam, which one you want to talk to us about first?
Patagonian Express. What a terrible cover that is. I think it is anyway. It's got no drama to it at all, has it? I sat in front of my bookshelves and just went, okay, that one I know is good, that one I like, and that one I like. And the first one that my hand landed on was this one. So perhaps the cover's not so naff after all. The Old Patagonian Express by Paul Thoreau. Now, he's written several books. I'm sure many people watching have read his books. But for me, a travel book has to start off by grabbing me within the first paragraph or two. I want to be enveloped in the story straight away. I don't want to be led slowly into it, and this book certainly does that. The way he describes leaving Boston in the USA on a freezing winter's day on the train heading for Patagonia, it's just gripping. His descriptions in this book as he's traveling down through are absolutely superb. I'm going to read you just one. And this was literally a random pick from the book. So in other words, I just opened it up and picked out a section. So this is from Costa Rica. It was sunny and cool on this late day in February. And there by the tracks was a beekeeper, like Sherlock Holmes in retirement, just as hawk-nosed and skinny. He looked up from his swarming hives and grinned at the train. Even the poorest, smallest house was neatly painted, the stairs swept, starched curtains flapped through the windows, in the yards were piles of firewood, the vegetable garden, the borders of flowers. They were proud little houses, and the pride gave them dignity. And for me, that had my skin tingling straight away, and I love it when a travel book takes me and puts me there. In this book, there's no sense of anything being manufactured at all, and he's not afraid to share his feelings about a place as well as observation. And he's got this wonderfully sharp wit. You know, it just keeps popping up here and there along, and quite often it really surprised me when I read this. But he brings people to life. his descriptions are so good, and I think this is one of the key things for a travel book for me, that when it's cold, you're there freezing with him. When it's hot, you can just feel the sweat. And I learned about each country and the people that he met along the way. I like travel books where an author has respect for the places that they're traveling through, and you can see their desire to learn as they're traveling. I want to like an author for a book that I'm reading, and I liked this guy. This book affected me so much that it was the first book that made me think, I want to travel in South America. This sounds fantastic. And to me, that's high accolade for a book. So The Old Patagonian Express, thoroughly recommended.
Yeah, super, lovely. And I mean, Paul Thoreau has produced so much, and all of it is remarkable. He's got to be one of the world's greatest travel writers. So can we quickly talk about Johnny Bealby next?
For sure.
Because I know that we all love this book.
So in the early 90s, Johnny Bealby set off to ride down the west side of Africa and to the south, and then up the east side. He set off having had an absolute calamity in his life. His fiancée, Melanie, had died. And this was, I think, in part his way of trying to heal himself by setting off on this journey. And he set off with a friend. And the next disaster happened relatively quickly, because the chap that he was traveling with had a bad accident and ended up having to go home. So he was then faced with, well, do I travel on my own, or do I return home and try again at a later stage? And this is where the courage of Johnny Bealby starts to show forward, and it's where the adventure spirit shines through. Now, it's been described as a boy's own adventure, and I grinned when Gordon mentioned that earlier on with one of his books. Yeah. I'm never sure if I like that phrase. To me, it's just a full-on adventure. And this has got more amazing descriptions, and some of them had my skin tingling. But one of the things that I liked about this book was his determination not to be beaten, his matter-of-factness when things went wrong with regards to how he was going to deal with those situations, his constant faith that he would find a solution, or that something would pop up and solve the problem for him. And I reread the book this week, and I just thought, yeah, I'm so glad that I've been asked to do this, because I haven't read it for years.
There's a bit that sticks with me, and repeatedly, and any time I was having difficulty on any of my travels, wherever I would be, and it was really, Johnny has given up. He's dumped the bike. I think he's in the Congo, is he? And there's too much mud, and it's beyond him, and he's just walking through the jungle, and a silverback gorilla jumps out in front of him, and he just sort of goes, shit, it is just me. There isn't any room for self-pity. Yeah. Go and get that damn bike and just get on with it. And I love that. And that was really a theme. He just tackled everything. But
there was one stage in the book where he'd broken down, and he catches a lift on the back of a truck, intending to pay. Trying to get somewhere where he's sort of not in the middle of nowhere, and he's got a chance to sit down peacefully and think about what on earth he's going to do with this bike that he hasn't been able to fix by the side of the road. The truck driver is just absolutely amazing. Now, most African trucks are much taller because they need much greater ground clearance. So he wonderfully describes how 6 guys lift this bike onto the back of the truck, and then the journey leaping and bouncing around in the back of this thing over the potholes, and how when they get to the destination, it's actually an army station, and the captain, who's just wearing a pair of shorts, no insignia at all, takes him off into the back and puts him into a room with 3 guys that he's never met before. And in the morning he wakes up and thinks to himself, darn it, it's probably a fuse. Why didn't I think of that yesterday? But I just loved those sorts of little connections all the way through.
Yeah. I can't remember what country he's in when the bike, because it's a 660 Yamaha. And I remember he's again broken down, hoping to get a lift to any nearest town or anything. And the guy that stops says, well, I could do that, or I could take it to the Yamaha dealer if you want. And it's just, but I've got to move you on, Sam. Got to move you on. Another book.
Okay, One Man Caravan. Robert Edison Fulton Jr. He was one of the early round-the-worlders. So 1932, 22 countries around the world over 18 months. And this trip happened by mistake because he drank too much wine and opened his mouth at the wrong moment. And I loved that. Just happens to be that the Douglas manufacturer owner is sitting at the same dinner table, and he hears Robert say, well, I'm going to do this, and offers him a bike. Now, this to me is a wonderful insight into travel in the times. It's a travel book for me first, and a motorcycle travel book second, which is odd bearing in mind what I just said. It travels through Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, India, Sumatra, and on around the world. And he has a very dry sense of humor, and a lot of his descriptions are dry. But they are part of the magic of it, because there's no pretension, there's no bragging or anything else like that. I like the fact that he describes how he prepared the motorcycle, because of course back then he had no brains to pick on this sort of thing. And when he's trying to work out what route he's going to follow, well, he starts reading up about a guy who'd ridden a camel across this part of the world, and that's the only information that he can get. It underlined to me how easy we've got it travel-wise now, or how easy we can actually have it. He's been described as a hero, but he would certainly never see himself as being a hero. I think he's actually quite a humble sort of chap, and this comes across in the book. I liked him a lot, and I think because of that humbleness and the way he was really happy to mingle with people and respect their environments, people liked him too. It's a real education, this book.
Yeah, isn't that something that we often see with people who've traveled a lot? We do like them. They've opened themselves to the world and the people of the world regardless. Now, there isn't going to be time, I'm afraid, for me to discuss mine. Johnny Bilby's is one of them, which is why I wanted to nut in there. This one, it's often called a Marmite book. You love it or hate it. I love it because it's. I mean, yes, he rants. Yes, it almost fails to be travel in the end, but I love the way it's delivered. And the first one that I was going to mention, Road Fever, has simply stuck with me a very long time, because that was against the clock. That's about a record, trying to drive to set a time record from Tierra del Fuego to Buda Bay. But it doesn't really matter. For me, there's a lot of, it is exciting. He's self-effacing. It stuck with me, and I don't know exactly. I've read it 3 times, but any book that really sticks with you there must be something particularly good about it. So many have stuck with me, and I know that in talks before, we could have brought up multiple titles, loads of books we want to talk about, whether they had bikes or canoes or anything. And of course, we're only X number of weeks from Christmas, dare I even say it. And everybody is probably thinking, well, you know what, we can't even get to the shops. I would like to take this opportunity not to plug anything that I've anything involved with, but bookshop.org, which is a new website which links loads of independent bookshops. It's kind of like Big A, in as much as you can find most things you want there, but the money is going to support in these times of need lots of small independent booksellers, which is really, really important. And I hope anybody watching might consider bookshop.org. Now, reviews, where do you find them? Because we've discussed many books. Well, it's where I would like to plug. Say, overlandmag.com has got tons of reviews on it, book reviews of books I and others have read and looked at. But I'm looking at barely a minute and a bit left. Gordon, what are you currently reading? What's on your bedside table?
I'm reading Two Wheels to War. I was lucky enough recently to meet one of the authors. Well, he's not really an author, because he's brought this book back into print, and it's about the brave young dispatch riders who on their own motorcycles volunteered in the First World War. And it's very factual, but it's very moving at the same time.
Yeah. Helen, what's in the van with you?
Post. A journey to the wild ends of the earth, and it's about a guy who basically goes to find these. He's looking for the wilderness and solitude, basically, and slightly obscure places. And so, yeah, there's like a chapter on different locations. But on a slightly different note, I just thought I'd mention there's if you're looking for books but don't want to spend loads of money, Gutenberg Project online, there's thousands and thousands of free books that are all out of copyright. So that even like the Shackleton book that I explained about earlier, I just downloaded that for free again, so I could remind myself about it. So there's some really great adventure books, you know, and you don't have to spend lots of money every day to read up on some of these old adventures. Yeah, Gutenberg.
And Sam, although actually before I go to Sam, for those who are struggling authors, and there are many who make their money out of it, there's a ton of new stuff out there. So yes, I often buy secondhand as well, or love free. But there are some people, you know, like Sam. So Sam, what are you reading at the moment?
I've actually just finished reading a series of motorcycle travel books, and I've got another 5 on my pile sitting waiting to be read. I've been so slow reading the books, but lockdown has just encouraged me to take my time with them. But I started reading something that is just completely different to give myself a break. So don't laugh at me, but it's this.
The Book of Useless Information. I do love those kinds of things.
There are some gems in. It's really funny, this stuff in this book, but it's just given me a break, so it's good fun.
Yeah. Well, I'm in the middle of one of my favorite authors that I didn't bring up today at all, which is Tim Moore. He's very contemporary. I've written loads of Tim's books, whether he's traveling on a bicycle. He did a really great one down the Iron Curtain recently, the line of the old Iron Curtain, or French revolutions when he tried to follow, or rather go ahead of the Tour de France. Another fine mess, is Model T Ford in classic Laurel and Hardy style going across the US. Very recently, discovering Trump America. So it's bang up to date, but using a car built in 1924, which is just lovely. Very humorous. So for me, there's a lot of wit. Now I'm delighted to say, apart from anything else, guys, I haven't had the nod yet from the boys to say we have to stop immediately, which is brilliant because I'm usually such a terrible timekeeper. So it gives me an opportunity to talk about humor in writing, because Tim Moore is full of it. Does that figure in your enjoyment of a book? You know, set adventure aside for a minute, but humor.
It really does. But for me, it's so important, but it's important that the author describes things that were funny in such a way that the moment is funny, not trying to make it funny. Does that make sense? Yes, it absolutely does. And I have just now had the nod, very subtly. I just had the nod. I love this technology. So we do have to wrap up. So yes, whether it's, if you guys, there's so many books we could recommend this Christmas. Nathan Millward, Full Circle, if you can dig one out, by Richard and Mops, Steph Jevons, Jackie Furno. There's lots of recent books just launched, and of course our ridiculous world trip by the guys themselves that are running this incredible Armchair Adventure Festival.